Can you introduce yourself?
I was born in Western Kenya,
Yes.
Vihiga County.
Where did you go to school?
Primary school I went to a little known school that is called Mtsuru Primary School.
Yeah.
Then I went to Nyamori High School, came to Egerton University,
Yes.
where I studied English and literature
Yes.
for my undergraduate, and then now I'm doing a master's in literature.
Well, did you have interest maybe in matters to do with literature and language when you were a student?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I went to a primary school in which my English teacher was the head teacher, and he loved reading a lot.
Yes.
And when we were, especially from class 6 onwards, he loved to make us read a book every week, and then we had to write about that particular book every week. So we had to summarize what you read from that particular book. And I think that is what gave me that interest to start reading literature, so that when I went to high school, I was already an avid reader.
Okay. What are some of the books you read when you were in secondary school?
In secondary school, I read books from popular literature. I enjoyed Across the Bridge. I read several others from David Mailu. By then, I was also reading a lot of Ngugi.
Yes.
So from one, I had already read The River Between.
Okay.
I had also read Achebe's Things Fall Apart.
Okay.
And then Hour of God. So I read a lot of books when I was in high school. Actually, during that time, because I had a lot of free time, I may not have liked reading the things that we were supposed to read in school. So, and I had friends also who loved reading, so we read a lot of literary texts when we were in secondary school.
There is this belief that young writers nowadays don't like reading much. What can you say, you being a student, maybe you who have been interacting with the students?
Actually now, maybe as a result of technology,
yes,
a lot of people are not reading as much as we read when we were younger.
Okay.
So I think maybe it is the interference, mostly technology.
Yeah.
And maybe because our system has made it such that people just need to pass exams.
Yeah.
So people read only those things that will help them pass exams. They are not reading widely like we used to do a long time ago.
Okay.
So I think that is what has hampered the reading culture a bit.
Yeah.
Because people now just concentrate on passing exams or things like that. So there are a few people that I know who read a lot, but most don't read a lot. They read only when it is necessary, especially to just pass the exams.
Okay. When I was a student, I also read widely.
Yes.
I read books by South African writers, West African writers, East African writers.
Yes.
Some of the books that I read maybe include Things Fall Apart, No Longer It Is, A Walk in the Night, In the Fall of the Season's Edge, and Cly, The Beloved Country. Can you tell me some of the books you yourself have read, African writers?
African writers, actually I've read a lot of the books that they have written.
Yes.
So to begin with, if we were looking to begin from our own country, I have read A Grain of Wheat.
Yeah.
I have read The River Between. I have read Petals of Blood. I've read all the books that Ngugi has authored.
All right.
And then I've read from Uganda. I've read Song of Lawino. I've read Godfrey Kalingogo's The Department. I've read Mary Okrug's The Weevils. I've read a lot of books from there, from Tanzania. I've read Parched Earth by Elias Lema.
Okay.
I've also read Kinchiketile. I've read a lot of books from Southern Africa. I've read Lagumas in the Dark. I've read Mind Boy. I've read from West Africa, from Peter Abrams.
Yeah.
From West Africa, I've read nearly every writer.
So long a letter. Maria Maba.
Maria Maba, in fact, my work, the one I'm writing.
The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born?
The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born is by Aikweyama. I've read that one also.
Yeah.
I've read even contemporary writers.
Yeah.
Like Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun.
Okay.
Purple Hibiscus, Americana.
Professor Eskia Mfalele says that the pioneer African writers, they had something, a common consciousness. Some of the things they wrote about were common across Africa.
Yes.
of course, we have the Pan-Africanism.
Yes.
So Tabanro Leong says that most pioneer African writers were also political activists because he calls them moderate politicians, and he says that politicians stormed the Bastille. That's how his Tabanro Leong says it.
Yes.
But writers are more moderate, but they are still activists.
Yes.
Do you agree with Tabanro Leong that the pioneer African writers were more political in their writing?
Yes, of course, pioneer African writers were very political in their writing, and there are a lot of reasons why they needed to do that.
Yeah.
Mostly because we were coming from colonialism, and there was a sense in which they believed that, which is true, that the colonial system had actually attempted to manipulate the history of Africa, the cultures of Africa, to claim that there had not existed any sensible culture, any political system, any formal government system in Africa before the Europeans came.
Yeah.
So they particularly, that is also quite political. So African writers had to respond to that. They had to refute, to begin with, these European claims that they did not exist anything in Africa before they came.
Yeah.
And then, of course, immediately after colonialism, of course, African writers, still the pioneers are writing at that particular time. There were a lot of promises the political class had made to the people, and then they fell into corruption, and none of those things were achieved. So it fell upon the African writers to be able to talk about these issues, to rebuke the political class, so that they get back in line to deliver on the promises that they had made to the people.
Yeah, there's a question that Lewis Nkosi asked Chinua Achebe during an interview somewhere. He asked whether African writers, whatever they were social critics, whether what they wrote had any influence in society. Do you think the pioneer African writers, their contribution had any impact in maybe doing away with the colonialism?
Yes, of course. You know, they were the first really critics to talk back, to write back, if we use that word from post-colonialism. They were the first ones to tell it as it was, to speak back to the Europeans and obviously voice those things that the Europeans had done to Africans, so that if, for example, our stories got out that early, maybe it was because those pioneer African writers were speaking back to the powers that be in Europe, maybe to show them, to tell them why things they were doing were wrong, why denigrating African cultures. So obviously those pioneer African writers were so much interested in Pan-Africanism, and if you go to French-speaking West Africa, of course they had this movement called the Negritude movement, which also came to literature, and obviously that was to reclaim the identity of being an African. So to a large extent it played a role in fighting against colonialism in Africa, because most African writers joined that Pan-African movement and the French version of Negritude, and I think their work helped to free the African identity from colonialism.
Chinua Achebe was among the first African writers to produce a novel, that is Things Fall Apart. But he said that he had led another book by Joyce Carey, known as Mr. Johnson. So Chinua Achebe says that he wrote Things Fall Apart from his experience growing up among the Igbo community, and he was able to capture what was going on. So the novel form of literature was not familiar to many Africans during that time. Whom do you think Chinua was writing? Had he some people who he was aiming that? Of course, Africans were not illiterate by then. So where was Achebe taking the message through the novel form?
As we said earlier in the interview, we talked about the ideas, but all the notions that Europeans had about Africans, that misrepresentation of Africans, because for them Africa was a backward place. In fact, if we use another contemporary of Joyce Carey, this is Joseph Conrad in his Heart of Darkness, he believed that actually Africa was deep within that heart of darkness. So there was no good thing that could have come out of Africa. So they had those theories about who Africans were. Of course, that was because they misunderstood the African, and obviously they applied European standards to Africans, so that when the pioneer Africans begin to write, particularly Achebe, their first duty was to respond to Europeans. So the texts, even though Africans were illiterate, most widely, of course, some were. By the time the Europeans were leaving, but when those books were published, initially the audience was European, because it was the Europeans that needed to be told that, like the Igbo, well organized in things fall apart, they had a culture, they had a religion, they had a political system, they had a way to run their affairs. So obviously Europeans had said none of that existed in Africa. So it was the work of writers like Achebe to speak to the European audiences and correct that image of Africa, so that they know Africa actually existed before the coming of Europeans, and saying otherwise, of course, was a misnomer which the Europeans had attempted to establish. So the first target audience of pioneer African writers was actually European, but of course they again were also speaking to Africans, so that Africans would know, those who could read, that there was something about their cultures, there was something about Africa, and it was not all gloom and negative like the Europeans had portrayed Africans, especially in their writings.
Am I right to say that literature was blooming during colonial era, maybe unlike today? Maybe it was more, maybe it had grown well, unlike today. You know, we had so many writers after independence, that is. Writers who are very known, like Ngugi Thiong'o, Tabano Leong, who are still known, even their works are being studied in most learning institutions. But today we don't have that production of literature materials. What is happening?
We do have a lot of these things that are still being produced. I think maybe mostly it is Africans who don't take things like literature that seriously. So now there's a lot of production. If you look around, African writers are actually still as vibrant as they were in the past, but mostly it is maybe because our reading culture. We still read, but we don't read as much as we used to read. Maybe there are so many reasons why people are discouraged from reading. Maybe a lot of attention has been given to the STEM subjects and all those kinds of things. So maybe the arts are to some extent neglected, but we can't say that the production of literary texts has gone down. It's still very vibrant, but maybe we are not reading as much as people who were here, maybe say the 90s going backwards. They read more than we do now.
Well, when you say that literature departments are still vibrant in learning institutions, for instance, in my case, I've written several books, and I've never had any assistance from maybe scholars of literature, whereby critics who can look at my work. Does university, maybe institute of, the department of literature, do you have a way of assisting upcoming writers by looking at what they have written? Maybe are they free to bring their works here, manuscripts?
I think they are free, but usually, mostly I think in the literature departments that we have around, they go with mostly writers who have become mainstream. So probably if they have not become mainstream, maybe if your works have not become that visible, we can't have access to your work. So that probably means that is the reason that your work may not be seen in class, because maybe it has not been brought to the attention of all these literary scholars that exist. But I tend to think that once they have come across a certain writer and they know they are producing work that can be taken to class, then they tend to bring that particular work to class. So maybe that visibility might be the one that is lacking, and that might be the reason why these writers are not yet read in our institutions.
When it comes to matters language, to become a writer, you must use language, because Tabano Leong says literature is ideas and ideologies encapsulated in a language or words. So how important is language to a writer, maybe?
Language is the tool of communication for a writer. So it's among although literature and language are two separate things,
Yes.
but literature cannot be divorced from language.
Yeah.
So that if you want to become a creative writer, then there's a need that you'll have to understand how language works.
Yes.
Because the way you are going to, the style you will have to create when you're writing or you're producing your text,
Yes.
will have to be well enmeshed in language.
Yes.
So that simply means that your most important tool as a creative writer, you might have your ideas, you might have all those other manner of things that you want to talk about.
Yes.
But first of all, they must be put in a language that is interesting for the people that are reading. So obviously, it is the most important thing that a writer would need, because without a language, you cannot be able to communicate.
Yeah.
It is that tool that allows you to reach out to your audience. So one will have to know how they are going to manipulate their language, how they are going to play with that language,
Yeah.
to be able to package their message so that it can become interesting, so that they can be able to obviously pass across the purpose as to why they are writing their message.
Yes.
So they can be able to communicate to their audience. Because
Yeah.
without language,
Yeah.
then you will not be able to reach your audience.
Okay. Professor Ezekiel Mfarele says that Wole Soyinka is among writers who are difficult to read their works. But Chinua Achebe is an easy writer. He likes straightforward language. Do you think there are some writers who just pretend to use maybe difficult words and then they complicate reading to the reader or something like that?
I don't think it is pretending to use language.
Yes, like Wole Soyinka.
Wole Soyinka is just expressing his mastery of language.
Yes.
So it has nothing to do with any pretense or
Okay.
whatever to do with all those things.
Yes.
It's just the mastery, the level of mastery of language that he has.
Yeah.
And then considering that he's argued that only those people who are knowledgeable are supposed to access his work.
Yeah.
So if you can't read what he has written, you better find something else to read.
Mm.
So I just think it is the level of competence that he has in language.
Yes.
And he doesn't tend to come down to meet everyone, because we have people with various levels of language competence.
knowledge, yeah, sure.
And he doesn't come down. But Achebe wrote for everyone.
Yes.
And therefore he wanted his work to be accessed by everyone, and therefore he wrote in a
that
simple
style.
version of
In
any
fact,
style
yeah.
that allows his text to be easily accessible,
Yeah.
which we are saying that Soyinka doesn't do much.
Yes.
But still, I don't think it is pretending. It is just that he's using a level of
Certain
competence
caliber of writers.
which he feels
He's
he's comfortable
Yeah.
in, so he's using his language as he knows it.
Yeah, in fact, he accuses Chinua Achebe of having what he called unrelieved competence. He told him straightforward, and Achebe was not happy about that.
Yeah.
That he unrelieved competence. That Achebe is competent to write in a a more difficult language, but he controls it.
Yeah, sometimes some writers look at the wider audience that they want to meet.
Yeah.
So I think Achebe wrote for the African audience also. So he wanted his texts to also be accessible to everybody who could just simply read in English.
In terms of production of literature material, how can you compare South Africa, West Africa, and East Africa? Because that was the comparison during our time, during post-independent Kenya. Who among the three can you say are more vibrant?
I think West Africa and Southern Africa are much more vibrant to us as a result of their literary traditions, the encouragement of people to read and write. Of course, maybe they had a lot of models to emulate. So I think a lot of people are trying to write to be like Achebe, to write to be like Soyinka, to write to be like Elechi Amadi, to write to be like Senghor. So people in West Africa write a lot, and I think much more people in West Africa read more than we do. So I think that might be a good reason as to why. But maybe something also that has helped West African writers is the fact that some of them have had that opportunity to live in the diaspora, and that diaspora has shaped obviously how they write, how they produce their text, because they can easily be published by diasporic or publishers where they live, and I think that has enabled them to produce more text, and because they have access to probably a global audience by the mere fact that they write from from Western capitals.
Yeah.
Then that means they can make money out of the work they are producing.
Yeah.
If you are writing and you live in East Africa, it might be so hard for you to sell your books that you produce. So maybe it's the availability or the likelihood that they are likely to sell the materials that they write. Because as a writer, maybe sometimes you also have to make money.
That is
You're not just writing, which we can say is it is possible for you to write and to make some money in West and Southern Africa because of their reading culture also than it is in East Africa.
Professor Chris Wanjara sometime commented and said that African writers who still address the issue of colonialism, all that stuff, all this stuff, they will learn out of steam, and their material will not be read. Do you think that students are still interested in these first African writers' books today that address the colonial themes or something like that?
They still read, but I tend to think maybe, like if we are talking about a university setting, you might find them reading only because it is assigned on the course. But some writers have known how to weave their stories well to include those themes, and they are still read. But to a large extent, we might say that some of these texts are still read because you still find mostly Things Fall Apart is still being read, so it's still very popular among students. So I tend to think some of the texts are actually still being read.
Okay. Now, maybe you being a student and a teacher at the same time, what are some of the challenges you find the students facing in becoming creative writers, maybe? What are some of the challenges as you teach them?
The challenges maybe are...
the hurdles you face, maybe?
The
making them accept and become writers.
Maybe people are already discouraged.
Okay.
I have an example of a student who has written a text and he can't get it published or something like that. So I think because he informed me that he had tried to find, he's gone to a lot of publishers, but he's not been able to get the text published. So I think maybe the lack of opportunities to publish text is one of the hindrances that students face when they want to become writers. And then I think in the modern world maybe there's a lot of distraction. People would rather stay on social media or watch television or watch movies or things like that than write. Alongside that, I also think maybe funding to get the money to invest in getting your texts published, and then maybe the way to translate what you have in your head into words or something like that. They face a lot of hurdles in trying to find that time, find that space to be able to really concentrate and then put what they are thinking down on paper or something like that.
Most published authors are either former journalists or scholars of literature like you. But of course, we have a few people who have never gone to university, schools of creative writing, but still they are writing well. So, according to you, what makes a good writer? Is it going through the education mill, as Chris Wajara calls it, or you can just read and become a writer?
One can read and become a writer. Education probably helps just to sharpen one who will become a writer. I had a lecturer who liked to say that writing is obviously 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration.
Same with David Cook, professor. That's what he says.
So the idea is that writing comes to those who want to learn the trade, who teach themselves, because no one will mostly teach you. Of course, we can go to creative writing classes, but classes provide you with only limited opportunities and time to learn these things. So a good writer is the one who reads, because there's no way you could write and not read at the same time. So one has to come with the other. So I think good writers can train themselves. They can make themselves productive by again reading widely. So because reading helps train the people who write. You learn a lot from others in terms of style, in terms of language, in terms of ideas, inspiration to also write, in terms of access to other cultures or all those kinds of things. So I think if one is a good reader and then they work hard to become writers, then there's a possibility that they could become good writers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe the government is in supportive of this kind of creative writers? Maybe should there be a fund maybe to assist writers, upcoming writers?
Yeah, the government obviously has failed the arts, because I think in the recent past the government has been mainly concentrating on the sciences.
Yeah.
Some have argued, senior people in government, that obviously our world will need to survive only because of the sciences, but I think the arts are still very important.
Yes.
They are still very important in having a wholesome country, in propelling our economies or all those things, because I usually believe that before scientists make these things, someone has to have imagined these things. So without that imagination that comes from the arts, without teaching people to imagine, because even a scientist needs a good imagination, and it is only from the arts that you teach people how to imagine. So the government has to not just think that it will produce scientists without teaching these scientists critical thinking, because critical thinking comes from the arts. You only learn how to read and interpret texts by how well you understand your language, how you understand the ideas that come out of these texts. So without creating an environment that would allow people to be taught these critical thinking skills, imaginative skills, innovative skills, then it is impossible that we are going to develop. So the government must put some measures around, some funding to encourage people to read and write.
The students in secondary schools, do you think they are well prepared before they join this Department of Literature and Linguistics maybe? When they come here, how do you find them? Are they well prepared by the secondary teachers maybe?
They know something, but I always hold this criticism against the people who decided, for example, to teach literature and English as integrated, because there's no way you will be able to succeed that. Literature and English, though literature is based on language, but it is not the same thing as language. So I think that is what has been deficient in the students who come here, because for them literature appears like the same thing as language. So maybe there is a need going into the future, because people are now talking about this competency-based curriculum, that someone will think about separating the two, because they are not the same thing. I've taught the British curriculum, and literature and English are two separate subjects. They are not taught together. You go to class to teach literature as a subject on its own, and then English. They are not the same thing, which I think is the thing that Kenyans have gotten wrong, because the moment we've integrated it, when a teacher goes to class to teach, they may neglect one part of it, because I just go to class and then I teach language, and when I'm teaching literature as language, then I think that is why students who are coming over mostly have their foundation in literature is not that good, and I think the problem may be laid down to the decision by the people concerned to make literature and English language an integrated subject. They should be separated because they are not the same subject.
Okay. In formal style now, writing styles, what can you say, how can you compare African writers? Do they like the same straight narratives, or there are some writers who use maybe styles which are maybe different? Like, can you say Ngugi wa Thiong'o likes the same as Alex Laguma or Peter Abrahams?
No, I think every writer defines their own style. Everyone learns differently. So I think if you're reading all these writers, you'll find that each one of them usually creates a style that allows them to be able to communicate the way they want to communicate.
They have freedom to choose.
They have that freedom of choice, because style means that it's a freedom to choose what it is that you want to do. So I think every literary writer tries to create their own style. They might borrow a few ideas from other writers, but eventually if you want to become a good communicator yourself, you must be unique. You have to be unique, and you have to create your own style, which is why Achebe is very different from Ngugi, and Ngugi is very different from Soinga, and they are all very different from, say, Maria Maba. It is because every writer at the end of the day has to decide what their style will be, and then develop that style. Maybe out of the background from where they have come from, maybe from their cultures or from their countries, or things like that, or where they have gone to school, the things they have learned. So each one of us has to be able, in the end, if you want to become a good writer, to have your own unique voice. And your unique voice simply means that you have your own unique style.
There is this term in creative writing known as patterns of exposition. doesn't mean every writer is exposing some facts using his own style or something like that. You are exposing something.
Exposition,
Yeah.
obviously, is a way of approaching a topic,
Yeah.
and then being able to explain it. So I think it simply means that there is something they
You
are
want to tell.
exposing.
You're exposing, yes.
So every writer has some truth they
Yeah.
think they are trying to highlight.
Yeah.
They have a message they are trying to pass across to the people who are going to be reading, or
Yeah.
something like that. So exposition might be just a way of approaching that particular subject, because
Yes.
it is a style of writing
Yeah.
that allows them to be able to communicate.
How do African writers compare with the black American writers? Maybe according to you. Like Toni Morrison, we have Langston Hughes. Is their writing the same, or the themes they address?
Some of the themes they address, for example, might be related, being of African
Slavery or
ancestry,
something, yeah.
slavery, and probably the history of colonialism, slave trade.
Yes.
But we write from very different realities.
Yeah.
So of course there will be a few differences between the works that have been written by African Americans.
And setting, of course, setting.
Yeah. The history of slavery, or the history of belonging to a different space, being born in that different space, and then these others being Africans.
Yeah.
Of course, they all grapple with issues of racism, issues of identity, issues of defending blackness or black consciousness.
Yeah.
Still, there will be some nuanced differences because of that sociological background they all come from.
Yeah.
But we are related in some ways, but still, because of being removed from Africa,
Yeah.
they have their own American realities that they must deal with, and Africans have their own African realities, which they also have to deal with. So there are differences.
How can you describe the growth of literature in Africa since independence? Is it growing?
Yes,
Can you say it has grown
African
as
literature,
expected?
Yes, I would firmly think that it has grown.
Okay.
African literature has advanced.
Okay.
The texts that we read are still of very high quality. So I would say, if you're looking at the books that African writers have produced,
Yeah.
I think we've grown.
Okay.
Literally, we are addressing themes.
Yeah.
We are meeting the global space also,
Yeah.
because now we have a lot of African writers, like I said, who write from the diaspora or who live abroad and then come back and they write.
Yeah.
So we could say it has grown.
Yeah.
Of course, we have, since independence, we've had a few Africans win the Nobel Literature Prize,
Yeah.
which means we've done well. We are not that bad. Maybe our reading culture might have slowed down
Yeah.
from the early times. People read a lot initially,
Yeah.
but now we don't do that much reading.
Yes.
But that does not mean that our literature has not developed. Actually, it is developing. It meets, and it is at the same level with the rest of world literatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want you now to face this camera and tell a young student who is maybe preparing to join university to study literature and language. Maybe you advise him or her what to expect here in your department.
Coming to the university to study literature might be one of the most important choices that you are going to make when you are coming to university, because if you study literature, it gives you a variety of choices of things that you could become when you get out of university. You could become a teacher, you could become a journalist, you could become a writer. So there are still so many opportunities that one, if they work well within outside there, and you could still become a diplomat or many other things. So obviously it's a choice. If you come here, you can do a lot of different things. You read a good number of books, you shape your language, you shape your understanding of the world, because we are saying literature usually is a product of our societies, a product of our histories. So literature allows you to understand your society better, it allows you to understand your world better. And of course, you should not say that if you studied literature you will be limited, because I know a CEO who now runs a software company and is running it successfully, a Briton who lives in the US, but his first degree is drama and Shakespeare from the UK. So that doesn't simply mean that if you studied literature at university, then your opportunities to do things even beyond art is impossible. So obviously it just opens your worldview so that you can be able to think critically and see all those things that you can be able to access, and the opportunities that you can be able to think critically and then be able to innovate around yourself and get your world working in a better way.
So as a scholar of literature, how do you spend your day maybe, apart from teaching? What other things do you do?
Usually when you have to work, you don't have so much else to do, so you exercise a bit in the morning probably, then you come to work, then you go back home, you write your things, you read your things, and then that is how it goes until the semester ends, so that you can do those other things. But here you do your things, you go to class and teach.
People outside there maybe associate scholars with research. Do you carry out research in maybe some of areas of writing and publishing maybe?
Yes, we carry out this research also at the university and try to understand the world of publishing, and then we also carry out research to look at emerging issues in literature, emerging issues around the world, and how these issues that are emerging in our communities are connected or are represented in literature or can be represented in literature. So we still have to read and research about literature and about the world around this literature.
As a department that deals with books, of course, do you relate with the publishers, maybe on a day-to-day basis, maybe, or something like that, to know what is being published, or they being interested with what is coming out of these departments?
Mostly I've not seen that happen but some individual lecturers or professors have connections with some of these publishers. But I think the reason maybe you said that most writers are not, especially the upcoming ones, are not read in our institutions. It's because maybe we operate at some small discordant between the universities and the publishers, so that we don't relate the way we are actually supposed to relate, because they are supposed to be publishing our work, and then they are bringing that work back to these institutions so that it can be read. But then I think that relationship is still
not very strong.
It's not very strong. So I think the universities and the publishers need to do something about it, so that they can be able to reconnect. Because you publish, this is what universities are supposed to do, to encourage people to research and write and publish. But the publishers have stayed away from us, so that simply means that there is still a small discordant between.
That is very true. What about the media? The media has not given you space, neither.
The media...
You as scholars, I have not seen you being interviewed on TV or something like that. They should give you space also, I think.
The media also, in the past, that used to be a possibility, like books and bookmen that used to be presented by Igara Kabaji and some other presenters. But now I think the media is just interested in appealing to the modern youth, the generation Z or something like that. So I'm not so sure they are attempting to look for ways in which they will appeal to a whole range of these people and bring some programs that might benefit these people, especially in the literary world, in the arts or things like that. So of course there is still
so the media has a role to play in promoting literature development.
The media still has a role to play in promoting this, other than just promoting only, say, the performing arts or all those. They should also be trying to bring in writers and all these other people, so that they can be able to help develop the literary field in the country.
Maybe you make your final remarks in general. What you would like the future of literature in Kenya, Africa, and the world at large to be? What is the future of literature development?
Literary development, I think it's still, I've seen a lot of people who still have a lot of ideas that they're trying to package, a lot of people who are willing to learn to write, people who are still willing to read. So I think literature still has a brighter future, but I hope literature is also going to be adapting to modern technology, because now people don't have to carry around huge books or things like that. So of course what Kenyan writers would need to do is to probably start thinking of a way in which their books are also going to be available in those modern applications that allow people to be able to read. Because now you ask young people to carry a book, they don't, but you can find some of them reading on their phone, reading on their laptop. So I think literature would need to embrace these emerging technologies so that we can be able to continue to grow our literature. We still have a bright future in that field, but then we have to be adaptive to the technologies and the changing world around us, so that we can give people texts that they want to access, and not just generally say that we are going to publish books and then put them in bookshops so that they can buy. That may not be something that will be accessible to a lot of these people.
The Kenya National Library Services is yet to be devolutionized. What do you can say, because we don't have libraries in rural areas? Do you think that is also a hurdle in the development of literature?
Yes, because obviously that interferes with readership. Because most people can't be able to access these books. So until these libraries can be able to take books to the people, then again we are going to have a problem with getting people to access these books. And then those libraries also need to be digitized, they need to be upgraded, and then they need to be replenished, because most of them only have books from a long time ago, and they only rely on donations. If these are public institutions, then the government should also start thinking about funding them and channeling resources into those institutions, so that those books can be bought and then be accessible to a lot of people through a variety of modalities, maybe via ICT, via technology. And we don't just have to, the national libraries can now actually be put online, so they don't have to actually have a physical library, say in some place like Mandera or some place like Busia County or something like that. They now can get all their books online, and that makes that devolution very easy, because people can now access those books from wherever they are without having to go to a physical library. So that probably is something that someone should be thinking about in government, so that those books can be accessed easily without having to go to the physical library, because maybe it will be still expensive, say, to construct 47 new libraries, when you can just get the material online and then take it to the people to access.
Finally, do you think there is need to have maybe writers workshops and scholars of literature? Sometimes they come in together to discuss matters of literature and writing and publishing regularly. Do you think there's need for that kind of thing?
Yes, there is a very huge need for writers and scholars to meet every other day to talk about these books, to talk about the ideas, or to talk about some of the things that writers need to address in their writings, because we already said that literature is a product of our society, and therefore literature has a space or a role to play in changing our society, in developing our society. So there is that need for writers to occasionally or regularly meet to be able to discuss what is changing, what is coming up, and how all these changes can be channeled into literary text, into some forms that can allow ideas to spread into the society, that can be able to make our society productive. So obviously there needs to be a reconsideration, so that universities and government institutions that are in charge set aside some funds that can also help develop these workshops, that can come up with strategies, that will come up with ideas on how people can become good writers, can allow our nation to develop these young people, the young generations, to become better readers than they are.
Have you ever written anything yourself? Have you published a book or something?
I'm yet to publish a book currently, but I'm working on a poetry text. I'm also working on my novel. Maybe in the future someday I'm going to be able to publish it.
Would you wish to edit some of my poems?
Yes, if you
can you promise me that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can look at them and edit them.
Very good. Yes. I think there is need for scholars to actually work hand in hand with the upcoming writers.
Yes.
Because whatever they do is related.
Yes, it is related.
What do you think?
That is true.
Thank you very much.